Happy Friday. Thanks to friends joining for another Friday privacy chat. And as you know, when I say privacy, I mean all the data issues, the power, the compliance, the challenges. And so today it'll be a bit more about AI with Amy Worley. And Amy, who has a phenomenal book about the confidence advantage, an interesting choice for an AI book. And I'm going to let her talk and explain and go get this book. For those of you like me who are Kindle Unlimited Reader subscribers, it is there and available. But the paperback, also very affordable, a book that she clearly wants to make sure is easily accessible. Quickly, before I introduce Amy, the big news, of course, for many of us is the federal privacy bill. And those of us who work in privacy also know that we are kind of regulating AI when we regulate data protection, when we talk about the different rights that we provide, when we talk about data minimization and deletion and even automated processing. We are talking, and whether you can collect this data in the first place. So this is indeed AI regulation. So, of course, we have the bill from the Republican working group in the House, introduced by the Vice Chair of Energy and Commerce. And some who've read the industry feedback, which is we love it, and the advocacy feedback, which is it takes away all the rights, may think that, well, maybe it's just Congress, making noise, but where will this go? I'd like to suggest that it is consequential because this is the first bill that we have that follows all of the different 20 some odd state privacy laws. And all the other bills that we had were really pre the whole huge expansion of state privacy rights and ADPA, APRA. A lot of them had some very strange structures. Here we have something which politically we think we all recognize. We have all these state privacy laws. Whatever you think of them, this is the framing for what a federal bill is likely to look like. Now, it does take the path of some of the more lenient state privacy laws. It's a Washington Privacy Act style, the Washington Privacy Act being the bill that actually never got enacted, but was the model in the end for many, many states. So it is very reflective of a lot of the rights, although it does take the more flexible path in a lot of places. But that's an opening gambit. And so we expect that wherever this goes, there's not a lot of time left in this Congress, and it doesn't yet have any Democratic support. But this is an opening gambit, and I think those who are advancing it understand that there will be suggestions to add more significant rights that might be in California or others. So this could be the vehicle. I just came back from Venice, the Venice Privacy Symposium, a lot of obviously European data protection discussion. Remember, it took 7 years to get GDPR in place, and that simply was putting in place a more detailed version of what was already the European directive, at the European level, which reflected a lot of what was in national laws. And it took 7 years working from something that was already 80% there. So this is going to be a long process, but this might be the opening draft. Okay, enough about that. You're caught up on the news. Amy, tell our friends who you are.
Sure. So thank you, Jules. I'm Amy Worley. I am a managing director at Berkeley Research Group, BRG, and I lead our international information compliance practice. I'm a privacy pro. I have been doing privacy for about 20 years. I also am a CISSP, so I have a deep security background, and I do AI governance. So that's why we talk about our practice group as information compliance. We look at really all data compliance in the same way you were speaking about earlier as something within our purview. I'm also the firm's DPO, and I do fractional DPO work. And I was a chief privacy officer. I was a chief privacy officer for a multinational pharmaceutical company just prior to coming into consulting, and I'm a lawyer in recovery.
And the group does what? What's the day-to-day? It advises and counsels?
Yeah, so we do everything from assessments, we do NIST-based assessments. I really like secure controls framework. I could do a whole thing on why I think that one's really cool. But we do a lot of advisory. We do tons of program build out, implementation support. especially right now in the AI governance space. We're doing a lot of work helping organizations who may have a policy in place. They may have their AI governance policy, they may have AI acceptable use policies, but actually get the governance built into systems and processes so it's meaningfully implemented. And do a lot of work right now on controls and monitoring. All this stuff is so dynamic. And so, as I talk about in the book, really focused on how can you track the controls that you're putting in place across time to make sure that they're effectuating the goals that you're actually trying to meet. So that is what we do if it relates to data and it's safe and responsible use. That's the world we're living in.
Well, I love books by practitioners. Many of the books we see are from either academics who have wise and thoughtful things to say, but they're often sort of sitting outside, maybe sometimes in an ivory tower, or even if they're more engaged, it's here's a theory of how the world should be and why companies or government is wrong. And that's helpful, tells us where to go and what's wrong, but it isn't always something I can use in my day-to-day life if I'm looking to help shape corporate practices. And then there are books by those in civil society, again, fighting the power, speaking truth, super important. But most of the people working are too busy doing their day-to-day guidance and legal work and policy work to carve out the time, or their company doesn't want them out there saying things that are built on the IP or that could, be critical or so forth. So there's just not that many publications from people who've actually created a privacy program, done AI governance, understand what's feasible, and want to share their knowledge about how others can do it better. So tell us a little bit more about the Confidence Advantage. It is available now. It's actually available in paperback for a relatively good price. When I've written books and done it with academic publishers, they charge a lot because they believe they're not going to sell too many. It's going to be in libraries and so on and so forth. The price points can be hard. This is very affordable. If you're using a Kindle Reader Unlimited subscription like me, it's there as part of that package for free. So really no barriers. But what
and we have an audiobook, so if you want to listen while you walk your dog, you can do that too.
So why now? Why the book? What's the big picture of this book, and who is it aimed at?
Yeah, absolutely. So this book kind of has an origin story in that I was working with a client across multiple different work streams. We were helping a little bit on the cybersecurity side. We were really digging in on privacy. They brought in a new privacy leader. They were committed to maturing their program. And then there was a mandate from on high to get AI governance stood up and get it going. And I started looking at this and thought, oh my gosh, there's all these different silos, but all of these people working across these silos are trying to get to one thing, which is digital trust. And I spent a lot of time thinking about, we're kind of coming onto a convergence of, privacy pros are also working in AI. To what extent varies based on the individual, and all that is still working its way out. But one thing I saw across all the silos was a need to explain to the executives why this stuff matters and what is the business case. And I first just went out looking for a book on this. I am a bibliophile. I read constantly, and I thought surely somebody's written a book for business leaders on the business case for privacy and AI governance, and I didn't see one. And so I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. I'll write one. So it is not a super technical privacy pro in the weeds book or a super technical AI governance pro in the weeds books. There are some great ones out there on those, and I feel like those already exist in the marketplace. What I've tried to do is explain, so the Confidence Advantage name is really important. I am drawing a distinction between trust and confidence. Now, I have been told by my Spanish and Italian speaking friends that this does not work as well in Spanish and Italian. It works better in English because trust comes from the German and confidence comes from the Latin. But the idea is that confidence is evidence-based, right? So if I say, Jules, I trust you, that in English has a sort of an emotive connotation, right? We trust friends, we trust neighbors. When I talk about confidence, I talk about measurable evidence-based steps that you can take that will give the marketplace confidence in your business. And we are having right now in the marketplace a conversation about digital trust writ large. Forbes just had an article that came out not too long ago about winning the AI arms race is going to be a lot about who gets digital trust right. And so I make the argument that we should be talking, when we're talking about digital trust, we should be talking about evidence-based measures to demonstrate to the marketplace that you should have confidence in the product. The other main idea in the book is that confidence is a component part of your product. So whether you sell fuller brushes, to date myself, or whether you sell software, this confidence is part of the product. And so that is the argument that the book makes. I cite a lot of research, and what we're seeing in the research is that companies that get this right actually grow their bottom line revenue growth. And so there is for those of us, I know we all talk about risk all the time. But I think we're coming to a place where the market is ready and is showing, and there is evidence that building a confidence-based program actually drives bottom line growth. And so that's the book in a nutshell.
There's an impression at senior corporate levels right now that two things are really important when it comes to the regulatory world. One, many of them seem to have the view that we are in a deregulatory environment. They hear the president talking about there shouldn't be any local level regulation of AI, and they hear some voices in Congress echoing that. They see the US arguing that European regulation is excessive. And at the same time, they saw ChatGPT launch with all sorts of failings and problems, but yet enormous market reception. And they feel this enormous pressure to move fast on AI and not let legal and all kinds of things that might have been an objection before be in the way. So you open with, this is not your father's regulatory environment.
Yep.
How do you frame that to business leaders? If I recall, you do sort of try to pop that balloon, telling executives it actually is a pretty regulatory environment, despite some of those optics that I mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. What I say is it's not deregulatory, it's differently regulatory. And I have the evidence in the book, I believe, to back it up. So there has been a 400% increase in laws and regulations since 2016. And those of us who are reading this daily and coming to the LinkedIn Lives and learning it feel that, right? Like the keeping up with it. One of the things that I think business leaders struggle with is they tend to think about primary regulatory, like, okay, is the FTC actually enforcing against X, or is the EDPB focused on Y? And what I do is really carefully walk through primary, secondary, tertiary ways that this is still regulated. You have obviously still, depending on what happens with the privacy bill, we have the patchwork of US laws. We have Europe, which is also considering, changing to what extent we don't yet know its regulatory environment. But we also have class action litigation. There is a commercial expectation. So I've been doing a lot of reading recently by different folks in the AI space talking about trying to reach a global convergence on what AI is going to look like. And the way that thinking is going, and it kind of aligns to what I'm seeing as well, is it's really going to be a private-private, right? While the government is figuring out how we're going to regulate this, the marketplace has to move forward. And so having responsible AI in place that is risk adjusted and matches the data you're using and the product you're selling is a commercial reality. And so doing this actually has an impact directly on whether your deals get done. I've worked with a lot of clients who originally got really excited about deregulation, which I understand, right? Reduce cost. But then when they went to try to get the value out of AI with tremendous investment, they learned really quickly that their partners in this space are expecting to see basic governance in place, basic controls in place, risk sharing across the marketplace. So it's not truly deregulatory, it's differently regulatory, it's a patchwork, it's litigation, and then it's the private to private commercial obligations that have real business impact.
Yeah, and look, to be pragmatic and political, it may have been the case that in the previous administration, you really needed to worry about someone accusing you of having an algorithm that was maybe biased against poor people or against immigrants or against different minority groups. And if that was a claim made by academics or civil society or a Biden agency, you were going to see a lot of noise and pressure and legal action and so forth. And it is true that today you might get that same pressure, but it's more likely to be, well, you're not treating media outlets that are on the right well, or that you're not reflecting a particular figure on the right. You will still get beat up by the cultural or policy unhappiness. It's just perhaps coming from a different angle. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a legal or regulatory pressure. And it doesn't mean that, somebody was right or somebody was wrong. It means that if your algorithms are going to be making decisions, you really want to be in charge and understand and have your eyes wide open. And yes, you do probably, no matter what the political noise is, want to make sure your algorithms are not doing things that are legally discriminatory or are going to be perceived as such by communities that are your customers and neighbors and friends, or morally. But I think at the end of the day, the point is, if you don't know what you're doing, and bringing AI sometimes means that you don't always know in advance unless you've done the right testing and oversight about what those end results are going to be, you're going to be hit with that critique. But the other half, right? One was, okay, so don't believe the idea that there isn't a lot of regulation. There is. And if it's not immediately legal, it is coming from all the other areas. But the other piece is the executives want to move forward and accept the risk. Right. Okay, you told me there's risk. Fine. I accept it and I want to move it forward, and I don't want you to slow things up. I need to, all of our companies are talking about how they can not weaken or loosen, but how they can scale the AI governance so they can do their job effectively. Thoughts on how not to be in the way, delaying things, saying no when you're supposed to say no, but not taking a long time to get to yes because of back and forths, because of all kinds of bureaucratic steps, all kinds of things that the business thinks, are taking too much time.
Yep. Yeah. So I talk about this a lot in the book. And this is, responsible AI by design. Excuse me. I was actually having lunch with a colleague yesterday who's in this space. And we were both saying we actually would like to see a little bit less process than some of what is being put in place. And this is why it's really clear to have decision matrix, right? So first you want to have a threshold analysis. And I've come into some companies and they're doing the same level of assessment for everything. And that slows everything down. It creates a bottleneck. It frustrates the business. And it doesn't meaningfully reduce risk. You're not actually helping people at the end of this. And so spending some time to figure out what are we actually going to put our smart people on? What are the risks that are important, that could hurt people, that could hurt the business, and focus our time on that. The other is having accountability. So who decides what when? And you can go fast if you're really clear on who decides what when. I always like to go into an organization and get their risk tolerance laid out really clearly, get their risk and likelihood tables, start to create a taxonomy, taking those to AI risks so that we're all speaking the same language, right? These are the risks we're concerned about. This is the ranges that we're in. Get clarity. Are we talking about risk to individuals? Are we talking about risk to the business? I think it's very important to make sure we know which of those risks we're talking about. And then building those gates into processes you already have in place. The type of AI governance that I've seen fail most often is when somebody tries to put a big process in on top of something without looking at what are the processes that are already there. Often, especially we'll take software, you have gating stages. And so getting for the right, at the right risk level, the right questions at each gate, and then knowing, okay, Jules is the one who can decide this up to this amount of risk. He says yes. We then track that in our risk register. Maybe we assign some mitigations, just like privacy mitigations. Let's have a metric or two that we're going to revisit on a quarterly basis to make sure that our mitigation is actually effective. You don't want to just have paper governance in the same way that you don't have paper privacy governance. You actually need to be tracking it over time. But spending your resources and your thinking time on meaningful risk is important, because this is too big and it's going too fast, and it frankly doesn't add a lot of value if you're trying to apply the same amount of process to everything. And then the last thing I'll say, there's a lot of folks selling tooling. There's a lot of great tools, but taking a governance tool and applying it to a messy process will just amplify your mess. And so get your process right first, and then find the tool that will help you with your process.
I do note that we are seeing some of our members have some success using AI tools to manage their governance. And 6 months ago, they were probably too skeptical, but the number of people who said that they're using Claude or something homegrown to do their first review or their first impact assessment, and claiming that it's not just better than a junior person, that it's enormously effective. So definitely hoping that scales it. We're seeing folks using bots to kind of help manage the threshold. So if, as one company at one of our peer-to-peer meetings recently said, if some scientist has some brilliant idea in the middle of the night and they kind of just want to, okay, am I going to have to go through, some sort of review for this, that they've got something to just bump against and get sort of a, well, if not this and not this and not that, then no, this is,
absolutely.
Don't come back for us.
I think you're crazy if you're not using AI to help. Like I have an AI regulatory analyst agent that helps me with my updates on a weekly basis, because like all of us, I get my inbox is full of this great information that I could not humanly sit down and consume. And so my agent that I built spends, and it's based on what I want to see, then sends me an email every week telling me this is a trend, this is what you need to be doing, etc. I do use AI to do some threshold analysis. So I think AI can help us. We have to be careful, obviously, that we're not over relying on it, because you don't want to create, a problem where you have an AI that maybe isn't being deployed correctly, that doesn't have the appropriate risk controls, not adequately assessing AI risk. But I'm really optimistic on AI. But I'm a yes if. I'm optimistic about it if you're using it in a controlled situation with the right context in place and the right parameters and the right testing. It can be a very useful tool.
Now, one place where the book, I think, is really most helpful, we're seeing pressure over the last couple of years on the chief privacy officer, the governance leads, budget. It's hard to get headcount. Activities and scope seem to be growing, all the new laws, everything happening globally, but yet budgets are tight. And we have a project led by Doug Miller, who's a former CPO, who's an executive coach who works part-time with us, to help our members make the case for the value of the privacy department, the value of the governance team. Simply talking about how many risks and how many laws, good, work hard and just figure that out. Making the case that this is a strategic business enabler can be a challenge, but is clearly the path forward. And the book spends some time, and I wonder if you can add a bit more to how you and how the book proposes making the case for the department as a business enabler, as a business value.
Yeah, so there's been some research on this that companies that get this right, and it's across not just AI, but it's, you know, cybersecurity right, privacy right, AI governance right, are 10 times more likely to grow the bottom line by 1.5% or 1.6. And if you think about this, it makes sense, because what that means is you have good governance, right? You have good controls. And as I explained throughout the book, there are different reasons that this manifests. You're less likely to have a terrible cyber event. You may have a cyber attack. We all have that. It happens. But if you have good cybersecurity controls in place, which is a part of this confidence by design, you're going to be more resilient. If you have good governance in place over your personal data, it can be a competitive advantage. Apple has done amazing things marketing privacy as a part of its brand. And the research into individuals is showing consumers care more than they used to. We have done a good job in the privacy profession educating people to understand how things like advertising networks and, you know, the secondary use of data online works. And so consumers are starting to care more about it. And so that makes sense of why you could see it, if it's done well, add to your bottom line. The other is good governance gets rid of duplication of 3 applications that do the same thing, of paying for a bunch of data that's high risk and low value sitting over in a corner somewhere. And so my book walks through all of this with case studies and examples to make the point that this is not just risk reduction. This is a way to delight your customer and to grow the bottom line. And that you really should think about this as a component part of the products or services that you sell.
What we're seeing companies sort of show us and show their peers in our discussions are things like a couple of the examples that you just gave, but also things like here's how we sped time to close contracts. These are things our customers are asking for. And so by the work we did and by the steps we took and the documentation, we didn't have to get back to them and do X, Y, Z. We were able to say, here's what you ought to be looking for. And here we already have this. So let's just move this deal forward. So here's how we sped up deals to closing. Here's how many contracts we facilitated. Here's how we identified areas, like you said, where data is expensive and unneeded, but also perhaps opened up other areas where because we were thoughtful and did X, Y, Z, we pointed out that we do have permission because we took the time to do the work. So some people sometimes say, well, is the privacy and compliance, are you really in, you know, the business of helping the business make money? And look, maybe at some companies, if I'm a certain layer of defense at a bank, maybe the regulator doesn't want to hear me talking about that. But in a vast number of other companies, being able to align with how you are strategically facilitating the business's use of data by having those processes in place is indeed a path to the resources and the success. Folks, we're going to leave you wanting more. Recommend the Confidence Advantage. Adrian has shared the link. Amy, super great to connect with you. And you're local in the DC area like me, I think. So perhaps we will have the pleasure to cross paths sometime soon at one of our upcoming events. Folks, we've posted a lot of the details, or at least the what, when, where of the annual DC Privacy Forum, where we talk with a fairly senior audience, all things at the intersection of tech, data, AI, and policy. So you are all, of course, invited to that. Adrian, on our comms team, for helping make things work so smoothly here. Thank you, and thank you. And we are off the air in